I'm delighted to welcome on Words of Wisdom, former trial lawyer and author of the excellent book, Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer, The Untold Story, Jay Bergen. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you very much, Colin. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to talk to you across the pond, as they say.
It's great, Anna, and it's a story which not many people are aware of. So let's start up at the beginning or take a step back. So let's go back to the 20th of July, 1969, when coincidentally, with the release of Let It Be, the Beatles were actually watching a screening together at the first cut of Let It Be. And the following day, John walks in with a new song, Come Together. Paul spots a similarity to Chuck Berry's You Can't Catch Me, and they end up slowing down the tempo to make it less obvious, but maintain one of the original Chuck Berry lines. The publisher and noted gangster Morris Levy's company, Big Seven, owns the publishing and agrees with John that he will record 3 tracks owned by his publishing company. So just before we start off with your own litigation involvement in the case, why was Paul not involved in the negotiation between John and Morris Levy? Did you ever get any insight to that?
Well, actually, the lawsuit that Morris commenced for copyright infringement in 1970 in the federal court was against both of the Beatles companies, their music publishing companies, and because John was then or shortly thereafter living in New York, and he wrote the song, Paul never got involved, and the lawsuit kind of proceeded, but for 3 years. And then, Morris was known for bringing these bogus copyright infringement cases and then, hope for a quick settlement. And finally, in October of 73, when the case was about to come to trial, John was in California with Phil Spector, and they were beginning to record the Oldies But Goldies album. And John said, I'm not coming back to New York. I can't come back. I'm working, and just settle it. So the settlement was, as you just posited, the 3 Morris Levy songs, one of which had to be You Can't Catch Me, that he would record on that album, the Oldies But Goldies.
I suppose from John's side, really, it was no great hardship because when the Beatles were, rehearsing, they would always default to doing rock and roll numbers when they were jamming. I think he probably had maybe in the back of his mind that he was going to do an oldies album. So to agree to record 3 was really no great hardship because he probably had it planned anyway.
I mean, I wasn't involved at that time, but I'm sure you're right that it was not, it was not a hardship. And in fact, they were songs. A couple of the songs that were discussed were "Angel Baby," which is one of his all-time rock and roll favorites, and "Be My Baby." So you know, he had a possible selections that would not be a problem.
And what I always find hard to understand about this case is why did John provide Levy with all of the rough mixes on the sessions instead of just the 3 songs that Big Seven owned that he'd agreed to record? Because Levy was pushing him to say, I don't believe you've recorded these songs, send me some evidence. But why send everything to him? It seemed a bit odd.
I I don't know the answer to that, but I think partially it is, one of the things I found about John, spending a lot of time with him, was he did not like to say no to people. I think he got embarrassed. He didn't want to appear to be rude. That's how he wound up going up to Morris Levy's farm just before he brought the band in to New York to record the rest of the rock and roll album, because as you know, Phil Spector disappeared with the tapes. I think Morris kept hounding him in that period in October of '74. When can I hear my songs? When can I hear my songs? And finally, he just called the record. He asked Morris, "What do you want? Do you want a cassette or what?" And Morris said, "Oh no, I want a reel to reel so I can play it in my office. And John, not thinking and making a big mistake, called Record Plant, where he recorded a lot of his material over the years, and asked them to send 2 reel-to-reel tapes of the unmixed, unfinished album. And that was on November 14th, 1974. And that was the mistake. I mean, when John told Harold Sider, his business advisor, that he had done that, Harold said, "Oh, I wish you hadn't done that," because now Morris had the album.
Do you think this huge mistake that he made sort of was part of the reason why in later life he withdrew completely from any business negotiations and left it all to Yoko?
No, no, I don't think so. I think he just decided in uh, actually right around the time I met him in February of 1975, that now that he had gotten back with Yoko, she was pregnant. He just decided to, I think, take a break. I think he was tired. I think he was really tired from, being continuously under pressure to turn out albums at a certain, 1 or 2 a year. And he did not like to be involved in business. His job, he thought, was the music. So we never talked about that, but it was obvious when I met him on February 3rd, 1975, at the offices of Capitol Records, that he was just kind of chilling out, Colin. And I think he was really eagerly anticipating the birth of whoever it was going to be sometime later in 1975.
And there's some incredible revelations from the book. And I believe it was your suggestion for John to rush release Rock and Roll to counter the mail order release of Roots at the time. And John said he could finish it within 2 days, which sounds an extraordinary short amount of time, bearing in mind all the length so far it was, trying to record this album.
Well, he'd been working on it all during the time period in 1974. I mean, the band came in. It was the same band that he used on Walls and Bridges. They came in mid-October 74. He finished the recording from the 21st to the 25th, and then he spent the rest of the time, refining it and improving it. And putting some additional music on it. But by the time I talked to him that day at Capitol's offices, he said he could finish it. Not only could he finish it, Colin, but he also said, "I'm really kind of sick of it, because we started in October of 73. Phil disappeared, and with the tapes, and I'd rather get it finished now." And my suggestion was really because Levy was supposed to be coming out with his album any day, and he did on the 7th. I think that's when he started advertising it on TV.
If you look at John's other solo albums, he was a quick worker. He didn't hang around. After several weeks, something would be in the can and remixed afterwards and released in short order. So this was quite unusual, wasn't it? The length of time this whole project took. So I can understand how he was maybe sick and tired of it by the time it got to court.
Yeah, and he knew, we all knew that we had Morris Levy kind of hanging over our heads, and the best thing to do would be to get it out quickly.
And that meant that it was a very different package to what was originally intended, because in the court testimony, John talks about a 64-page booklet that he had intended to accompany the release with sheet music and biographical information about the original performers. So what we actually got was very different.
Oh yes, and I think also because when they were doing the recording in L.A. At A&M Studios, it kind of became the place to be. I mean, there were people coming in all the time. David Bowie would stop by, Jose Feliciano, so he was going to have very elaborate credits, and he couldn't do that. Couldn't do that because got to get it out. Got to get it out.
So before you got to court, you had to undergo a rehearsal at the Dakota with Yoko Ono. How did that go?
Well, it was kind of an audition, which I didn't realize was an audition. John called me, and this was in March after I'd been involved for about a month or so, and he said, can you come up to the Dakota tomorrow? And Yoko would like to meet you. And I said, no, oh, sure, I'll come up. So I went up at 11 o'clock, and we sat in the living room. John was not there. This was strictly one-on-one. One of their assistants brought in a tray with black coffee, and it looked like she was eating black caviar. She had a little cup with something in it and a spoon. And she had obviously read both of the complaints. By then, Morris had filed the two lawsuits, one in state court and one in federal court. And she, questioned me about the cases, the complaints, and we talked about it a lot. She told me how important it was to them. And in fact, one of the things that both she and John emphasized over the next couple of months was that they just wanted to hold down the amount of money that John would owe Morris. And I remember telling her, if I have anything to say about it, John's not going to owe Morris anything. And finally, she said, well, thank you very much for coming. And I left. And it wasn't until later, and I don't know when later, probably maybe years, that when I realized how much control Yoko had, that if she hadn't liked me, she would have gone back to John and said, call David Dalgenis, who was my partner, who was John's lawyer negotiating the separation of the Beatles. I would have been out. But once I passed the audition, she really didn't say anything, even though she didn't interrupt or make suggestions during the trial. She was very quiet.
And on the first day of the first trial, Yoko Swami predicted there would be a delay, and sure enough, there was quite a big delay.
Well, yeah, that it was that night. It was actually the second day, Colin, because we had the first day, and it was going very badly for Morris because he just couldn't keep his story straight. So he kept trying to volunteer stories to the jury. And it was the next morning when they came into my office. Their limo was downstairs, and John said, Yoko has something to tell you. And I looked at her, and she said, I consulted my Swami last night, and he said the trial's going to be interrupted today. And my initial thought was, oh, a Swami, because I did hear that Yoko was into astrology and Swamis and all of that. Although she never asked me when my birthday was. I think that was something she asked a lot of people who started working with them, but she never asked me that. And that day, as I relate in the book, the trial was interrupted. It was quite an explosion, really caused by Morris and his lawyer.
I'm sure she knew your birthday. I'm sure she got it somehow.
Well, I don't think she did, because the trial started on my birthday, January 12th, 1976, and I did not say anything to them. I didn't, when they came into the office that morning, I said, well, you're going to wish. I didn't say, today's my birthday. Never
And what
mentioned.
type What kind of media circus was there going on at the time? Because obviously John and Yuko were still very much big news. So outside the court each day, did you have to fight off a whole load of photographers and press? What was the build up to the case like?
There was no buildup. This was early in the time when you had to go through metal detectors. So inside the courthouse, when you went inside the main door, there was no press. There was nobody there. We went in and out of that place for 20 days over the next several months in January, March, and April. And the only coverage, Colin, was there were a couple of articles in Rolling Stone because Rolling Stone found out about it because I called, I think they knew about the lawsuit being filed, but I decided I needed to get an expert witness to testify and compare the two albums, Roots and Rock and Roll, for our counterclaims and Capitol and EMI. Remember, he sued not only John, but Capitol and EMI. And I think he did that because he thought he could kind of grift his way into a settlement, some kind of a deal, you know, because Morris was a scam artist. In addition to being a dangerous mobster at all, it was just that John and Yoko decided that they were going to just press forward with the case. And I think there was one article by Chet Flippo because Chet was somebody I knew, and I called him, and he recommended Dave Marsh as my expert witness.
And he gave a superb account in court because you had to educate the judge on what rock and roll was. He was a classical music buff, a harpsichord player, I think, and he was quite intrigued by the whole notion of rock and roll.
Oh, he was. And of course, that was the stroke of luck because the first judge with the jury that blew up, that, you know, recused himself from the case, he didn't care about the music. We didn't even get to that. But when we found out that Judge Grisey was not only he was a harpsichordist, a pianist, and classical music who knew nothing about John Lennon, the Beatles, or rock and roll. That's when John and I got our heads together and decided to really give him kind of a primer on rock and roll music, and he loved it. He loved it. We brought sound equipment from the record plant into the courtroom and played records for him, John's records, Beatles records, and so he really got into the whole thing. You're right.
Did he get into John's avant-garde music as well, Life with the Lions and Two Virgins? But how did he respond to that? Because that was played, snippets of that were played in court as well.
Well, it was, and his argument and his view of that was that, well, John Lennon tried a number of different things. Remember, there was a passage I quoted in the book about when he was awarding the damages on April 8th, 76, about how John Lennon, his reputation is, is more sensitive than other rock and roll artists because he tries a number of different things. He tries avant-garde, he tries rock and roll, he writes his own material. So there was that whole section there where he listened to some of the music.
Morris Levy was obviously associated with the Genovese crime syndicates in New York and beyond. What was his physical presence like in court? Could you describe him? Was he an intimidating person to look at and to hear him talking? And
Well, yeah, he was, he was a big man. He was like 6'1", 6'2", I guess.
Mhm.
And he had this throaty way of talking. He said he had polyps in his throat, so he could look and sound menacing. But John thought he was a character, And he did not really show up in court once he finished testifying in the second, the retrial, when we started the trial again, 2 days after we started the first one. Um, he he did not get involved. Other than testifying in the beginning, he was not there very often. I think he realized that his gamble that he was going to be able to strike some deal with Capital, EMI, and John. I think he realized that that wasn't going to happen. Remember, I quote in the book where Harold Sider had a meeting in Morris's office where he played "You Can't Catch Me" from the Rough Mix tape, and he said, "I'm going to put it out. I got a shot. I got a shot." He was rolling the dice there.
And later on, a character from The Sopranos was based on Morris Levy as well.
Yes, Esh Rabkin, who was a Jewish gangster who was kind of the one of the real advisors to Tony Soprano, and he was based on Morris.
John can't have been unaware of his reputation. Do you think he was drawn to dodgy characters?
I don't think so. I don't think he was aware of his reputation, and I wasn't aware until I kind of got into the case. But the facts. But we never talked about it. We never talked about Morris was dangerous or the mafia or anything. It never came up. I don't think. I think John was really a little bit naive about Morris. But he, as he said and testified, he was a character. That's the way I looked at him, the way he talked, the way he acted, and of course, uh, Morris and kind of catered to that and spent a lot of time with John and invited him down to Florida. Now, I don't know why somebody, maybe Harold Sider, didn't advise him, John, you shouldn't be hanging out with this guy, because that was mentioned in not only the cases, the decisions by Judge Grisey, but it was also mentioned in the appeal, the decision on the appeal where we finally won.
Now, you put Jesse Ed Davis on the stand, and Jesse Ed was partying hard when he came to New York City to testify. Did you have any concerns about putting him on the stand?
I didn't have any concerns about putting him on the stand because I had interviewed him in Detroit in October of 1975 when he was on the road with the Faces. I tracked him down there, and I thought he was going to be a terrific witness. It was John who warned me when I told him I wanted to use Jesse and Eddie Motto, who lived in New Hampshire. He said, "Oh, Eddie will be fine, but Jesse Ed likes to party, so you'd better get him in early. Make sure don't try to get him in at the last minute. Get him into New York and get him settled, and you know keep an eye on him." And that's what I did. He came in about 3 days before. I thought we'd need him, and I was staying in the Drake Hotel right around the corner from my office because I lived in New Jersey at the time and I had a long commute back and forth. Couldn't do it every day. So Jesse was in the same hotel I was in.
And John was with you sort of almost every day, 20 days, I think he attended court, and you had the pleasure of going to, was it Sloppy Louie's for lunch most days as well, the seafood restaurant.
Yes.
You must have had quite a few amusing lunches there, I would imagine.
Well, it was the first day of the trial, and when we had the break at lunch, we got in the limo, and I said to John, "What do you want to eat?" And John said, "We're only eating fish." And I said, okay. And I asked the limousine driver to take us down where the old Fulton Fish Market was, right on the East River. And I knew there were great seafood restaurants there. And he pulled up in front of Sloppy Louie's. We went in. It was bare bones, no tablecloths, plastic cups, but the seafood was terrific. And we just wound up going there every day for the 20 days that they were in, that they came to the trial. And John came, Colin, every day, even though he didn't have to testify every day. His testimony was kind of spread out. And I think that was very important that he come every day to the trial. The judge and Morris wasn't there. So here was John, showing his interest.
He was noted for watching a lot of TV, so presumably he watched a lot of courtroom procedural TV programs as well. So do you get the sense that he was fascinated by the whole process of being in an American courtroom?
I don't know whether he was fascinated, but he did, I think, enjoy being there. We had worked very hard on his testimony about the facts of the case and everything. So I think he enjoyed testifying. And once he and the judge got into this routine of colloquies about rock and roll music, he really liked that. And that John was very, very smart and had a great way with words. He was very witty. And remember from the book that Bob Gruen showed up in court one of the days he was testifying, and when we were driving back uptown after that day, I said to John, "Oh, I saw Bob Gruen in court today. What was he doing here?" And John said, "Well, I had him come down and take a picture of me testifying." And I said to him, that may be a violation of law. And John said, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay." He covered the camera with his coat. And when I asked him why the photo, he said, I'm going to someday I'm going to write an album of all my and the Beatles legal songs, legal problems, and that's going to be the cover of the album. So, the other thing was John was always thinking ahead. He was always thinking ahead, and he even testified that sometimes sitting in court, he was thinking of the lyrics to a song. So, but he was there and he was present. Present, I mean, in the sense that he knew what was going on.
What a shame he never got to record an album of all his legal problems. We could have had Dear J or OJ or something like that, this is what we've lost, to the world. I particularly like to dig that he made it Phil Spector. I think Judge Grisey was asking him if Phil Spector was a popular producer, and John said sometimes, or words to that effect, I think.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Either I asked John, or the judge did that. Well, he did popular music, right? And he said, well, some of it was popular. that was an example of John's like John's description when Levy's lawyer tried to cross-examine him about the Two Virgins album and the photos on the cover and the back of the album, and saying it was in bad taste. John said, no, look, the whole point of it, the whole point of the nude album was, first of all, nudity's been part of art for centuries, and I think he said 2,000 years. And he said the whole point of it was that if you kind of erase all of the hype and the press and everything, I looked like everybody else. And it was a great answer. And Colin, we knew that that Levy's lawyer was going to raise that issue again, because that's what disrupted the first trial. And I never asked I never asked John. I never went over, well, what are you going to say when he brings up the nude album? Because I knew John would have an answer, a good answer.
It seemed like he was on best behavior because we know from previous interviews he could be very flippant and sarcastic and condescending to interviewers. So, but on court, he was very much in control.
Oh yes, he was. He was totally in control. And during cross-examination, didn't make any difference.
Were you surprised?
No, no, because one of the things I really emphasized in my trial work was the facts. You have to get the facts down. And I wasn't really worried about the law because the facts would lead me to what the law is. So John and I spent, a lot of time going over the facts, and I became convinced very early that he and Harold Sider and May Pang, they were both witnesses, were telling the truth about that crucial meeting in October of 1974, when Morris used that meeting to kind of conjure up this, this oral agreement that the judge found never existed, and that Morris had illegally released the Roots album. And he knew it was illegal.
Jay, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been absolutely fascinating, and look forward to speaking to you again in the near future.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much, Jay.
Enjoyed it.